Here is the last part. This means the fourth part or the fourth chapter of William Faulkner's Dry September. As she dressed for supper on the Saturday evening, her own flesh felt like fever. Her hands trembled among the hooks and eyes, and her eyes had a feverish look, and her hair swirled crisp and crackling under the comb. While she was still dressing, her friends called for her and sat while she donned her dressed underings and stockings and a new voile dress. Do you feel strong enough to go out? They said, their eyes bright too, with a dark glitter. When you have had time to get over the shock, you must tell us what happened. What he said and did, everything. In the lift darkness as they walked toward the square, she began to breathe deeply, something like a swimmer preparing to dive, until she ceased trembling, the four of them walking slowly because of the terrible heat and out of solitude for her, but as they neared the square, she began to tremble again, walking with her head up, her hands clenched at the sides. Their voices about her murmurs, also with that feverish glittering quality of their eyes. They entered the square, she in the center of the group, fragile in her fresh dress. She was trembling worse. She walked slower and slower as children eat ice cream. She head up and her eyes bright in the haggard banner of her face. Passing the hotel and the coatless drummers in chairs along the curb looking around at her. That's the one. See, the one in pink in the middle. Is that her? What did they do with the nigger? Did they? Sure, he's all right. All right, is he? Sure, he went on a little trip. Then the drugstore, where even the young men laughing in the doorway tripped their hats and followed with their eyes the motion of her hips and legs as she passed. They went on passing the lifted hats on the gentleman. They suddenly ceased voices, different, protective. Do you see? The friend said. The voices sounded like long, hovering sighs of hissing exhaustion. There is not a negro on the square, not one. They reached the picture show. It was like a miniature fairyland with its lighted lobby and colored like lithographs of life caught in its terrible and beautiful mutilations. Her lips began to twinkle in the dark. When the picture began, it would be all right. She could hold back the laughing so it would not be waste anyway. Undertones of low astonishment, and they looked their accusement places where she could see a aisle against the silver glare and the young men and the girls coming in two or two against it. The lights flicked away, the screen glowed silver, and soon life began to unfold. Beautiful and passionate and sad, while still the young men and the girls entered, scented and sibilant and half dark. They paired blacks and backs, silhouette and delicate and sleek, their slim, quick bodies awkward, divine young, while being them with silver dream accumulated and inevitability on and on. She began to laugh. In trying to suppress it, it made more noise than ever. Heads began to turn. Still laughing, her friends raised her and laid her out, and she stood at the curb, laughing on a high, sustained note, until the taxi came up and they helped her in. They removed the pink voile and the sheer underthings and the stockings and put her to bed and cracked ice for her temples and sent for the doctor. He was hard to allocate, so they mistended to her. She hushed exaggerations, renewing the ice and fanning her. While the ice was fresh and cold, she stopped laughing and lay still for a time, moaning only a little. But soon the laughing wailed again and her voice rose, screaming. Shh, shh, they said, freshening the ice pack, smoothing their hair, examining it for grave. Poor girl, they knit one another. Do you suppose anything really happened? Their eyes darkly alight, secret and passionate. Shh, poor girl, poor Minnie. Chapter 5. It was midnight when McClendon drove up to his neat new house. It was trim and plush and beige and almost as small. With its clean green and white paint, he locked the car and mounted the porch and entered. His wife rose from a chair beside the reading lamp. McClendon stopped in the floor and stared at her until she looked down. Look at the clock, he said, lifting his arm, pointing. She stood before him, her face lowered, a magazine in her hands. Her face was pale, strained, and weak looking. Have not I told you about sitting up like this, waiting to see when I come in? John, she said. She laid the magazine down, poised on on the little balls of his feet. He glared at her with his lot eyes, his sweating face. Did not I tell you? He went towards her. She looked up then. He caught her shoulder. She too passive looked at him. Don't, John, I could not sleep. The heat, something. Please, John, you were hurting me. Did not I tell you? He released her and half struck, half flung her across the chair, and she lay there and watched him quietly as he left the room. He went on through the house, ripping off his shirt, and on the dark screened porch in the rear he stood, mopped his head and shoulders with the shirt and flung it away. He took the pistol from his hip and laid it on the table beside the bed, and sat on the bed and removed his shoes and rose and slipped his trousers off. He was sweating again already, and he stooped and hunted furiously for the shirt. At last he found it and whipped his body again, and with his body pressed against the dusty screen, he stood panting. There was no movement, no sound, no not even an insect. The dark world seemed to lie stricken beneath the cold moon and the illness of stars. 1931. And that's the ending of Dry September.